Hi, I'm Janice Stevenson, and this is Bethel Today, the show of the Bethel Democratic Town Committee. Today we're going to be speaking with Stephen Palmer. He is our town planner, and we're going to be talking about the kinds of work that he does for our town, a little bit about his vision for Bethel in terms of our development, and the different aspects of things that he's involved in. Steve, welcome to the show. It's good to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
That's good. Now, have you done TV stuff much, or is this kind of new for you?
This is new for me.
Right.
I do a lot of public meetings, so I'm more used to a live audience.
Talking to a bigger group.
Yes.
Well, today you have an audience of one. Actually, it's a lot more than that, but for our purposes, it's just going to be the two of us.
That's fine.
Let's start out talking a little bit about what your background is that brought you into this position in Bethel. What were you doing before?
I was, for almost a decade and a half, the zoning enforcement officer for the town of Westport.
Okay.
And upon leaving there, I came to Bethel in 2003. And I was hired as the planning and zoning official, which is my official title.
Okay.
But I refer to myself as the town planner because I think that it sends a different message than being the planning and zoning official. I think it's more broad in its description of what I really do, what the functions of my position are.
Okay.
And I think it sends a positive message to the town that that there is somebody looking out for the future growth of Bethel.
Right, that there is a plan.
That's right.
That there is a plan. Yeah, I know. I moved to Bethel, it'll be 15 years ago in January, and I got a sense with some of the things that were happening early in my tenure here. I actually was mentioning to Steve that when I first moved here, I was surrounded, the house I live in was surrounded by undeveloped land, and within 6 months that was put on the market and then purchased and developed. So I became aware of that aspect of some of the things that he deals with. And I felt at that time that there maybe was a lack of planning in Bethel. What sorts of things are involved with the planning aspects? You must deal with other town officials. You're involved with some of the different boards. Let's start with the boards that you interact with or that you're responsible
Sure.
for.
My duties include I oversee all the activities for the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Zoning Board of Appeals. The Inland Wetlands Agent is a part of our office, the Land Use Office, and so we oversee the activities of the Inland Wetlands Commission as well. There's a newly formed Economic Development Committee in town, so I'm working with them on economic development initiatives.
Okay.
I'm the floodplain manager as well, so I hold a lot of different hats. I'm probably the first face that the public would see on economic development questions, you know, with potential development in town.
Okay. I want to just go back for a minute and talk about the first three boards that you mentioned, because it occurred to me that probably a lot of us don't really know what is it that the P&Z board does, the P&Z Board of Appeals and Inland Wetlands. Can you talk a little bit, just briefly, about their function and what they do for the town?
Sure. The Planning and Zoning Commission is responsible for administering the zoning regulations with regards to development. Sometimes it's on an informal basis, and sometimes it's very formal. There's processes for site plan approvals for, let's say, commercial construction on a minor level. Okay. And then there's processes for special permit applications, which are major projects that have a greater effect, and they have a lot more latitude to make decisions on potential development. The Zoning Board of Appeals, on the other hand, they're responsible for varying the zoning regulations, so or issuing a waiver of them. So when an individual or a property owner wants to put on an addition on their home, let's say a deck that might be in the side setbacks, and there's no other area that they could do that, or their house is in a pre-existing non-conforming location, they go to the Zoning Board of Appeals and ask for a waiver of the rules to allow them to put that deck within that required setback. Okay. And hardship has to be proven, you know, with that. It's a land-based matter that you have to, you know, what characteristics about your property necessitate the variance.
Got it, got it. What about inland wetlands? What do they do?
They regulate, according to the state statutes, waterways and watercourses and water bodies within the town of Bethel. So we have what's considered a 100-foot upland review area from a wetland.
Okay.
So the wetlands are regulated, and they regulate within 100 feet. So any activity that's proximate to a wetland falls under their jurisdiction.
So anytime, like for example, the development that was done around me, I know that there were a couple of lots that originally they had hoped would be the standard size, and they had to actually go to 5 and 6 acres because of wetlands, and that would have been due to their looking at it and seeing what was going to be appropriate for dealing with the wetlands? That's
right. There's a lot of different things when you look at a subdivision, and one of the things is the amount of wetlands and the location. Wetlands have to be separated from a proposed septic system.
Sure.
A house location, engineered drainage systems, stormwater, runoff. So there are a lot of different things. So that could have very well, maximized the land, mass required for a lot.
I think it did. Let's now switch over, because you also mentioned the economic development, that you work in conjunction with them, and I know that since I've been here, there have been, people get very concerned sometimes about what's happening along Route 6, also what's happening up at Francis Clark, because that also gets into the whole thing with the Terre Haute property, I know, that's up on the hill there. Talk a little bit about how you work with them and some of your vision and thoughts about some of those different areas which could bring in commercial development and how you'd like to see that done.
Sure.
What you're working for.
One thing that I realized when I first came to Bethel was that it was extremely well preserved. The downtown was a quaint, historic downtown, which had much of its original, charm to it in architecture. Route 6, on the other hand, actually in the same way, was largely undeveloped.
Right.
And that was very interesting and in a way very surprising, because most of the other towns surrounding Bethel have been overdeveloped in some manners, or developed with less than desirable strip type centers. And while I find that to be a very good thing from a planning standpoint, I wanted to change Bethel's tone in terms of reactionary response to development to proactive. So I've identified the downtown as a primary area, Route 6 as a primary area, and then the 2 industrial parks that we have, Francis Clark and in the Berkshire Industrial Park as well.
Right.
When we did our plan of conservation and development in 2007, the Commission put a high priority on focusing on a potential for Route 6 development, because there's so much available land up there, underutilized or vacant. And we took a very hard look at that, and we worked with our regional planning agency, the Housatonic Valley Council of Elected Officials, HEVCO. And
gotta love those names, right?
And they partially funded a study specific to Route 6, in addition to the Board of Finance, giving us some money for it as well. And what came of that was really a master plan and a vision for that area. It includes streetscape, which is very important. We want to try to maintain charm while promoting, development, including, bigger buildings, maybe more mass. We wanted to plan for the eventuality of increased traffic.
Yes.
When I first came here, it was just a 2-lane road, and you could see with the big wide development on Route 6, the intersection of Old Hollyville and Stony Hill Road. That's been widened out. There's turn lanes, turn signals now, and it's changed tremendously. Well, what that plan did was it provided for the future growth of the corridor, and so we kind of know how it's going to look like infrastructure-wise, and we set some guidelines in terms of what we'd like to see for architecture, trying to maintain the New England charm that's so prevalent in within Bethel. But we wanted to separate it from the downtown area, because they are 2 distinct areas. One is accessible directly from a major highway, and one is accessible from local streets and our train station.
Right.
So there is a little bit different, tone that we took with it, understanding that it's really its primary focus would be on people who live in the Stony Hill area and people who may travel from Route 84 as well.
Okay.
So there may be non-resident customers who travel on Route 6.
And any ideas about what kinds of businesses or commerce that we'd like to see? Have you got a feel for that?
Well, we do. When we recently updated our zoning regulations,
Okay.
we did a major overhaul, and that included a redoing of our zoning map and zoning designations.
Okay.
And we renamed the Route 6 corridor from Commercial Industrial Zone, which has a real strong, moniker to it,
Sure.
to the Route 6 Business Zone.
Okay.
So we were trying to promote a more retail service-friendly environment just by the change in name only.
Right.
We also changed our regulations to prohibit the future industrial use of that land, because we do have industrial parks,
Sure.
that have available space and plenty of
Right.
opportunity to expand there, and we wanted to focus those areas on retail and service primarily. In Route 6, though, we did allow for the provision of some residential. We haven't conquered exactly how much residential,
Okay.
but it would be accessory to a commercial use. So
Okay.
we're talking about mixed-use buildings,
Okay.
where we might have first-floor retail, second-floor, third-floor apartment, or commercial along Route 6, and then having maybe a residential buffer in between the single-family neighborhoods
Got it.
that abut behind those properties.
So you have sort of a transitional space.
That's right.
Right.
So it might go from commercial to mixed, multifamily, and then down to single-family detached residential.
And we didn't really get into this at all in our preview conversation, but actually we maybe did. Isn't there sort of an advantage to having commercial ventures come into town as opposed to maybe residential, or talk to me about sort of, where you have transitional stuff? I guess the impact, I know that when you do a subdivision, when you bring in single-family homes, that there are a lot of concerns in terms of roads that are going to be put in, and the long-term issues with that, and the long-term issues with what happens with the tax base and the grand list, because you very likely will have children coming in, et cetera, and that costs the town a lot of money. Is it a little different if it's multi-purpose, or if it's
It is.
more apartments, et cetera?
It is, and the Commission was very cognizant of that when they were looking at the study, and when we were rewriting the zoning regulations. We really do want to promote the commercial aspect, and specifically to the Route 6 corridor. We wanted to make commercial the priority, but we understood that there are single-family, quiet neighborhoods behind.
Right.
So there was a balance there, and that could very well be a very desirable commuting location as well.
Sure.
So we wanted to strike a balance that we would have some residential, but not enough, and it would be constructed in a manner which would really preclude it from families
Right.
and children, because the Commission is very cognizant of how development affects the grand list and revenue for the town,
Sure.
and ultimately the budget.
Right.
We know that the taxpayers are very cost conscious in Bethel, and it was a
Right.
very conscious effort on their part to make sure that we were mindful of
Right.
its effects.
Well, obviously, if you're working on bringing commercial stuff there, and then you do have still the industrial parks, the Berkshire area, and Francis Clark, that any time if we can bring intelligent business of any kind in that fits the community, that has the potential for actually taking some of the stress off the individual homeowners in terms of their tax burden, right?
That's a very, very big goal with our
Right.
zoning regulations,
Right.
absolutely.
Right. So talk to me a little bit about, the Berkshire area. I don't think of it as industrial. I think of it as being more corporate. It
really is a corporate park, and they do promote it as a corporate park. There is light industrial there, though. There is actually manufacturing that goes on there.
Okay.
But they're public face, and rightfully so, because it's a really beautiful park. The owners of the property have done a great job in managing it and developing its image, one with Duracell there.
The Duracell complex is stunning.
It is.
It's a great location.
It is, but there is a room available for mixed commercial uses there, from light industrial to high technology business as well.
Cool.
Bethel Healthcare Center is there, and while I can't say what tenants may also be going in there,
right.
I've spoken recently with them, and I know that they're negotiating for additional tenants in there in the healthcare field.
That's neat. That's neat. How about Francis Clark? Where do things stand there? I know that at one point, and it may have been early in your tenure, or maybe even a little before you came, they were looking at, because that property does get into the Terre Haute land, and there was some concern about not just turning it into pure industrial, really being mindful about what went on up the hill behind it. How are things there now? What's happening with that?
Well, the industrial park is defined right now.
Okay.
And the goal for the Economic Development Commission that originally put forward the idea of an industrial park and eventually sold the lots for development, they want to expand the park beyond its boundaries. And that includes a portion of that other land of the town of Bethel, that's considered the Terre Haute land. Right now, I think it's in the planning stages.
Okay.
There are some hiccups to planning for that area, because it's designated in the state plan of conservation and development as rural land.
Okay, and what does that mean?
Well, what that means is that it's not designated for sewerage, public sewers. So it's supposed to be low-density residential. So the goal is that if we do want to pursue development in there, is to actually go to the state legislature to amend the state plan to include that area within our sewerage area. So we'd have to work with DEP on that, the Office of Policy and Management. So it's a kind of a lengthy process, and it's a little complicated, and it's not solely within Bethel's jurisdiction. There is state authority over this matter. So we're working on that.
Okay. Wow. I had a question that just whoop, right out of my head about, actually I think I was thinking about your interactions with other town officials. So do you work with the first selectman? Have you had input into the road plan that I know that he's thought about for doing a plan of how we improve the roads over the next several years? Has that been something that you've been...
No, I mean, I gave my observations about, what I thought would be appropriate, considering some of the planning that we're doing. Really, that's the province of the highway department and the public works department. They have a list of when those roads were last reclaimed and paved, and there is a process for that. So I haven't delved too much into it. I know that it's a big issue,
right?
And
of course.
In total, there's a high percentage of roads that are really inadequate at this point, or past their useful life, I should say. So anything that we can do to try to restore at least some of those roads would be beneficial.
Right. But because you're more on the planning end of it, you think about, or you're more directly involved with, we have this new thing going on, what is that going to do? How are we going to have to deal with the roads at that point if such and such a change occurs?
That's right. We deal more with the proposal of new roads rather than maintaining the existing roads.
Right.
If we were more urbanized and there were intersections with signals, that may be more appropriate to start considering, do we widen this area for a turn lane? But we only have one stoplight, actually, or one stoplight that's under town jurisdiction.
Really?
Town, yeah.
Which one?
It's at the entrance of the educational park and Plum Trees Road.
Right, the one at the bottom of Whittlesey.
That's right.
Wild. So all the rest of them are state?
They're on state roads.
That's really cool, or interesting anyway. Now, the downtown area, you mentioned that and talked about the plan for that, and you mentioned a little bit about, I think in our correspondence prior to meeting tonight about the trains, is that right? Something about what's happening with trains. You want to talk about that for a little bit? Yeah,
the downtown is, like I said, it's a very special place. It's not just used by people from Bethel.
Right.
That, it's really the only downtown, within several town limits.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely
and I
true.
know that, you know, from the merchants, they say that Bethel's very, you know, important to other communities as well as,
Yep.
you know, to Bethelites. That being said, you know, we've hit a very hard economy, and
Yes,
you know, we
absolutely.
can see that by empty storefronts. And you know, the commission and myself, we're trying to figure out ways to prop up and strengthen the downtown and have it be sustainable. There's a new initiative, which is really an old initiative, and it's called transit-oriented development.
Okay.
It's development that takes place within a certain radius of a train station.
Okay.
So it's a walkable community. It's mixed use. It's something that we think is very appropriate for our downtown, considering
Sure.
that we have about 100 acres surrounding the new train station on Durant Avenue that's industrially zoned.
Okay.
And
Okay.
this is old historic industrial zoning, you know, from the past 100 years, and it was served very well when the hat industry was, you know, in its heyday.
Right.
But today, you know, with the amount of congestion that we have, you know, commercial and, you know, trucks and truck traffic, you know, really snarls the downtown, and it takes away from that charm or that walk down the street.
Sure.
Some of the most beautiful neighborhoods we have are actually right along this industrial zone in Grand
Yeah, they are.
Street,
Yes,
Farnham
absolutely.
Hill. I mean, those are real
Beautiful.
treasures that we want to try to, you know, enhance and preserve. So what we determined was, you know, what would be the best use for this industrial area. We all, you know, covet industrial use as a revenue generator. So we embarked on a study of the downtown area for potential transit-oriented development,
Okay.
and turning this zoning into from industrial to mixed use. And what we came up with was that it could work, and we could actually, it's probably beneficial to change it, not just from a social standpoint, but from a financial standpoint.
economically, right.
And economically. We not only would be putting more people in the downtown area who could take advantage of the
everything
services
else.
that are
Sure,
offered,
sure.
you know, within walking distance, but you know, I think we can make a dent on traffic, you know, support
That'd be
sustainability, you know, promote green and mass
Yeah.
transit.
Neat.
So there's a lot of potential benefits to it. So we're very excited about that idea.
How do you go through the process of changing the zoning? So if it's industrial now and you want to switch it, what are the steps you have to go through to do that?
Well, what we did this summer after we prepared this plan is we had a public input meeting.
Okay.
And there was a very good turnout. We had more than 50 people there of all ranges and backgrounds who were interested in this idea. And the first thing we want is public buy-in. I mean, it's really important. I mean,
Sure.
the commission wants to hear from the community. While they believe that they have very good ideas based on, you know, pretty sound
Sure.
planning principles.
So what did the community say? So you had 50 is a good turnout for something like that. And what kind of was the mood, would you say?
It was very tepid at first.
Okay.
They were very hesitant. You know,
Okay.
people are resistant to change.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and that's okay. And we know we have to overcome some of the obstacles that are in place for this
Yeah.
idea. Even with the nuisance of the industrial use that's there right now, and the proposal for, you know, a better community that's residential and light commercial, it still made people nervous about traffic.
Right.
And we do have to overcome an obstacle with regards to sewers as well.
Right,
We're
right.
at our capacity in the downtown area for sewerage. So we know that we need to, you know, find a solution to gain more sewer capacity.
Sure, sure. It sounds like, you know, if you give a mouse a cookie. But on the other hand, actually, are you familiar with the concept if you give a mouse a cookie, the cookie has to have the glass of milk, and then it has to have it for the crumbs, and then, you know,
Yes.
next thing you know. But it sounds like an interesting thing, and I like the idea of something that can deal with particularly the traffic on Greenwood Avenue on Saturdays. It is very hard because it is a really wonderful area, but it's so congested sometimes. But that's kind of neat.
Yeah, you know, traffic congestion is a negative, but it's a positive in a way if you look at it in terms of
You've got
activity.
people coming through, exactly.
Yeah, that there's activity, and that's really important. Not that we don't want to solve those problems and try to find alternative means of navigating, over the train tracks or through, the downtown.
Right.
But
right.
And we are looking at potential solutions to them, but it is a good thing.
Yeah, it does. I'm pleased to hear that, and I think that it could be a real positive, neat change. And I can understand why people would be nervous because, we want to maintain the quaintness. And I think in a lot of towns, when they start to make changes, that the quaintness sometimes does get lost in the shuffle. And
well, one thing that we did in preparing our new regulations, we adopted a new zone specifically for the downtown. It's called the Village District. And that's permitted by state statute. It's not a historic district per se, but what it does is it allows the commission to have jurisdiction over architectural changes to the old historic buildings.
That's good.
So demolition would be looked at very closely, and all additions and architectural changes to buildings would be looked at very closely as well.
Terrific. Now, I know that you were concerned at the beginning that we were not going to be able to fill the time, and I just got the 2-minute warning. So, Steve, I really appreciate it. It was a great conversation.
I do too. Yeah.
And I think, as stuff is going on with the downtown, and actually other, any major changes, I would love to have you.
Sure.
You can get in touch with us, and we can talk through.
I'd appreciate the opportunity.
That'd be great. That would be wonderful. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. It was nice meeting you.
All right, you've been watching Bethel Today. I'm Janice Stevenson. Again, this is the show of the Bethel Democratic Town Committee. And I just want to point out we also have a website that is betheltoday.com. If you're interested in seeing some of the different things that we are about through the year, I'd love to have you come take a look. There's also a way to contact us if you're interested in maybe getting involved a little bit. I know we've just come off a political season, and you may be real glad not to think about politics for a while, but if you should feel that you want to get involved, do get in touch with us. That would be terrific. Again, Steve, thanks so much for coming in. And we will be seeing what else. I don't have new shows to talk to you about right now, but I will do that probably the next time that you're watching the show. And I'm watching my camera person to see about time. And you may have wondered why I was laughing. It was because she was showing me signs previously. Good day.